Hello, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to teach you how to make stair stringers. We're going to make another set just like that one right there. But first of all, you need to have a plan before you even get started. You need to have the measurements, height of the deck, try to figure out how many steps we're going to have and how deep and high each one's going to be. I'll help you understand that here in just a few minutes. But let's start off with what we need to get going. We're going to need a square, 16 inch by 24 inch. Plus a couple of clamps. These are 3-inch clamps, C-clamps, but you can use a little bit smaller ones because we're not going to clamp to the square, to the beam. We're just clamping the clamps to the square itself. That's it. That way that the square is, well, we get the same markings each time. So we're just going to push it up against the beam is all. Alright, so we have the longer side of the square on the bottom, 24-inch side, and the short side on top. The bottom of the square is measured in our depth of our step. So the C-clamps are going to go on the back side of the square just to make sure that the measurements on the front side of the square line up with the edge of the board. So that's what they're there for. Okay, so we just want to make sure that the measurements stay exactly the same and we can zip through this pretty well and easy, and it won't slide around when we're trying to make the markings, which is awesome. Okay, so then we're going to need either a pencil or a sharpener to mark. Always double checking our measurements, measure twice, cut once. My grandfather used to always say it's a good rule of thumb. Now we're going to start in about 10 inches from the end of the board. You could have started in a little bit closer, but that's where I'm going to start. It lets me cut a little extra off, which is nice. So we're just going to line it up and draw our first V, really. Later we're going to come back and draw a perpendicular line down from the first step, and you'll see why we started back where we did. Right now we're just going to mark that V. This is a treated pine, which is one of the most common wood to use for structural lumber, for decks and things like that. So it's very wet, that's why I have to use a Sharpie. Not only does it look better for you guys, but I could barely see the pencil myself. So after we make the first V, we're lining the second one up, so that our depth of our board, the measurement right there on the outside of the square, can line right up exactly with the line. Alright, now what about our depth of our steps? Let's talk about that. Most people are going to use 10.5 inches. Why? Two deck boards or two 2x6s are going to be 11 inches actual width side by side. You're going to put an 1/8 inch space between them so that the water can drain. So you're going to have 11 1/8 inch. Where you use, average person's going to use 10.5 inches on the depth, which was going to leave a roughly 5/8 of an inch overhang, kind of stair nose, if you will. A lot of people like that. I, on the other hand, for this particular deck, am using 11 1/4 inches for the depth. Reason being is I'm fully facing these steps. Okay, so they're going to be fully faced. There's not going to be any open areas, and I don't want any stair nose on them. I have old ladies walking up this deck, and I don't want them to catch their feet as they're walking up. Also, these steps are at 8 inches high, which most steps are between 6 to 8 inches, and since I'm at the higher end, I also did not want any overhang because of that same reason. You want anyone tripping on it. Let's go back to what we're doing here at the moment. You can see I was marking these steps. It's really good to keep track of how many you've got on there. And the last step, we're still going to mark the top part of the V because we're going to use that to draw our line to get our perpendicular below the top of the last step. That probably didn't make a lot of sense. Just do it. Just draw it up and then stretch out that line all the way across, because that's where we're going to cut it and that's where it's going to lay against the deck. Okay, now we're coming back to the first step, and we need to draw that perpendicular down also. So we're going to line it up and draw it downward and get our perpendicular. Alright, now let's see here. Where was I? I explained to you guys that the average depth is 10.5 inches, which leaves the 5/8 inch stair nose overhang. I used 11 1/4 because I wanted it flush, and I'm using a facing. So that's an 1/8 inch between the two boards and an 1/8 inch between the last board and the facing, so the water can drain. Okay, height. Well, that's easy. Like I said, between 6 and 8 inches is standard. Do double check with your local codes to make sure there's something some specific that they require, but most of them give a range, and that's a pretty average range, at least here in the U.S. Now, how to figure that? Well, hopefully you have a nice level flat cement pad that's out in front of your deck or wherever you're doing these. If so, that's great. That makes that even easier. If not, you got to kind of take a little bit of a guess on where everything's going to hit, do a lot of measuring. But anyways, let's assume you have a nice flat level cement pad underneath here where this is going to land on. So you just measure from the ground to the top of the deck. Now, of course, you have to decide, is the top of the deck going to be your last stair? Most people, yes. Some people want the stairs to extrude past the deck, so the deck is not going to be the last step. The stair risers are going to contain all the steps. Alright, so let's just play with a number. Let's say you measure from the ground to the top of the deck 65 inches. Well, how many steps are you going to need? Well, most of the time, some people will tell you there's different ways to do this. There is. I like to take a guess at how many steps you're going to need, and then just divide that out. Take 65, let's say you think you need about 7 steps. So you take the 65 and divide it by 7, and actually I forget what the number is, but that's close to 10 inches, and that's way too tall. Okay, so let's get closer. So when you divide 65 by 9, which would give you 9 steps from the ground to the top of the deck, because we're using the top of the deck as the last step, it gives you 7.2222 repeating. Okay. So that's what 65 inches divided by 9 is. So 7 inches is going to be pretty good. And when you're 0.222, so if you basically make each step at basically 7 1/4, starting with your, all your main steps, and then when you make the bottom for the base step, you can cut that a little bit shorter, okay? Or a little bit taller if you need to. That's always the easiest one to adjust as your first step. But like I said, between 6 and 8 inches, so 7.22 is right there in the middle. That's good if you had 65 inches height. Now, how far out are these steps going to go? So let's figure out how long of this 2x12 beam you need. And if I didn't say 2x12 in the beginning, that's what you need is a 2x12. I've seen some people do it with a smaller beam, like a 2x10. It doesn't really give you the strength that it really should have. But yes, I guess you could get away with that. But let's go back to the height. No, I'm sorry, the length of the board. That's what we're talking about. I'm getting off track. Going back and adding the voiceover is harder than you think. Alright, so let's go again with the 65 inches high, and we're going to do 7 steps, okay? So what we're going to do is, we know that the two boards together tightly are 11 inches. Let's forget about that little 1/8 of an inch in between. Let's just try to keep it simple. 7 steps is what we're making, which, yes, that does include the top of the deck, but you still got to count that, because that's what we're going to measure off of. So 7 steps times 11 is 77 inches. So measure from the base of the deck, or whatever else we're making the stairs from, and measure out 77 inches, and that's where the steps should land at. Now you're going to measure up diagonally to the deck. Now that will give us the measurement for the beam that we need to buy. And that's not the perfect measurement, okay, because we are going to have cut both sides at an angle, which is I can actually add inches past that mark. So if you measure 9.5 feet and you think, which actually I don't think that's right for this, I'm just throwing that out there, and you're like, oh, awesome, I get a 10-foot board. No, that's too close. You need to go up to the 12. All right, as you can see here, I'm running out of time. I used a skill saw to cut up close to the V, but not all the way through, which means the back side of the blade didn't cut all the way through. I'm then coming back with a Sawzall to square that up so we're not cutting past. Makes the stair riser stronger. Guys, I hope you paid attention to what I was doing while I was jabbering. Hope this helped you out. Here we go, another perfect matching stair riser. And it's really simpler than you think it is to make. So, thanks again for joining me.